in memory of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Words written by Rabbi Sharon Brous. We hold now many layers of grief, first and foremost for the death of an exceptionally brilliant, fierce, and courageous Jewish woman, a jurist, a mother and grandmother, a role model to millions, whose steadfast commitment to justice, equality, and basic fairness made this country and world a better place. And we hold anticipatory grief as we project the ramifications of her death and the brazen political maneuverings that will likely ensue in her absence. We must remember, even as we say mourners Kaddish for our beloved Justice Ginsburg, we must not yet say mourners Kaddish for our nation. For this fight is not over. And Justice Ginsburg, of all people, would fervently decry the passive acceptance of predetermined outcomes. We grieve, and then we pick up the baton and carry on. This fight is not yet over. Do you remember the beginning of the pandemic when people stepped out onto their balconies with their instruments and performed for their neighbors? Or put together impromptu jazz quartets on sidewalks, or played bagpipes on rooftops? That incredible outpouring of spirit, of irrepressible creativity, and the longing for music and soul and human connection. And so it was wonderful to hear about our friend Daniel Estrin in Jerusalem. Daniel is NPR's correspondent in Jerusalem, a close family friend, and a cellist. And early in the pandemic, he appeared on my mother's beautiful Jerusalem front porch with his cello. And as she sat in the doorway of her home, he played selections from Bach's unaccompanied suites for cello. It's because our family is so close to Daniel that I learned shortly thereafter about what became my most favorite happy story from the pandemic. Early on in March, when Israel was still great at dealing with the coronavirus epidemic, and by then the whole tourist industry had completely collapsed, Israel made the decision to use hotels as COVID rehab hospitals, where people recovering from COVID-19 could recuperate and be completely quarantined. These COVID hotels were run in large part by the military. Once you walked into the door of the hotel, the doors locked behind you, and there was no leaving until you were completely negative for corona. Most of the hotels were single culture hotels. The government reasoned that Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews, were more likely to agree to be quarantined in places where everyone else was like them. As it turned out, there was one crazy fluke, one exception. One COVID hotel in Jerusalem ended up with a whole mix of people: Haredi Jews, Palestinians, secular Jews, Muslims, and Israeli Bedouin. It wasn't long before people figured out that, hey, they were all sick. They didn't have to eat alone in their rooms. They could gather in the dining room. People who would otherwise have never met each other, much less spoken to one another, began to share stories. They videoed themselves singing together at dinner, high-fiving in the halls, laughing at comedy in Hebrew and Arabic, doing yoga workshops on the roof, figuring out how to do a Passover Seder. Their videos got posted on social media and soon went viral. Soon, all over Israel, people were watching what was going on in Hotel Corona. Daniel heard about it, and that's how it became an NPR podcast, one that I highly recommend. 32 minutes of an amazing, totally unlikely COVID story. Meanwhile, here at home, things were looking pretty grim. We were at the epicenter of the spreading epidemic. As the coronavirus was exploding, so was another toxic virus. It had been here all along, but we didn't see it. Racism. We knew about racism. We did. We've spoken about it here from this pulpit. We've studied and read. We traveled to the Civil Rights South. We marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We saw the terrifying footage from Charlottesville, Confederate flags side by side with Nazi flags. We knew about the choking death of Eric Garner. We did. In early September, just a few weeks ago, Kol Ami joined with the Workers' Circle in an evening with filmmaker Ilana Trachtman, who was bringing to light an amazing and hopeful story of African-American students from Howard University who protested together with the local Jewish community in a 1960 summer of protest. She's still editing the film. And when we previewed segments in advance of the presentation, I noted that it was amazing that since she was still working on it, she could include segments from the recent Black Lives Matter marches and signs of "I can't breathe." "Shira," she said, "that footage was from 5 years ago." I was horrified. I knew it, didn't I? We've heard the stories, we've seen the footage, we read the articles. The landmark piece of 400 years of slavery and racism in America, the 1619 Project, made its stunning appearance, after all, a whole year ago. But did it register? Did it make a difference? Something has shifted, and it has shifted now, ever so briefly. For a brief period of time, our hearts are cracked open by the coronavirus. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, and these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart. The Kotzker Rebbe asked, "How odd is that? Place these words upon your heart? Why wouldn't the Torah say in your heart?" "Because," he answered, "sometimes your heart is hardened and nothing can get in. So place these words on your heart. And sometime when your heart cracks open, in a time of heartbreak, the words will be lying there and they will fall in." Many of these words we've heard before, but they must have been just lying on our hearts, and we are hearing them as if for the first time. And there are new voices, and we are listening like never before. 3 voices. The first voice, 1845. Frederick Douglass recalled a beating by his master, Captain Anthony. "I've often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heart-rending shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom he used to tie up to a joist and whip upon her naked back till she was literally covered with blood. No words, no tears, no prayers from his gory victim seemed to move his iron heart from its bloody purpose. He would whip her to make her scream and whip her to make her hush. I remember the first time I ever witnessed this horrible exhibition. I was quite a child, but I well remember it. It was the first of a long series of such outrages, of which I was doomed to be a witness and a participant. It was the blood-stained gate, the entrance to the hell of slavery through which I was about to pass. It was a most terrible spectacle." Witness and participant. 8 minutes and 49 seconds. Videoed by a young black teenager, first thousands and millions of people watched the brutal spectacle of the murder of George Floyd, watching the brutal spectacle of a black person being killed. The second voice. "I have rape-colored skin," Caroline Randall Williams writes. "My light brown blackness is a living testament to the rules, the practices, the causes of the Old South. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, if they want monuments, well then, my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. I am a black Southern woman, and of my immediate white male ancestors, all of them were rapists. My very existence is a relic of slavery and Jim Crow. There are those who want to dismiss the hardships of the past. They imagine a world of benevolent masters and speak with misty eyes of gentility and honor in the land. They deny plantation rape or explain it away, or question the degree of frequency with which it occurred. To those people, it is my privilege to say, I am proof. I am proof that whatever else the South might have been or might believe itself to be, it was and is a space whose prosperity and sense of romance and nostalgia were built upon the grievous exploitation of black life. But racism is not just about the South, or about the brutality of slavery that we were not taught, or about the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, or the destruction of prosperous black neighborhoods and businesses in St. Louis, Chicago, Rosewood, Florida, Washington, D.C., Houston, Texas, and where Central Park stands today. No, we didn't know about that either. It's also about today, and about you and me. The third voice. A Westchester teenager, graduate of Ursuline High School, Kyla Golding, now in her first year at Harvard, speaking a few months ago at a vigil at the steps of New Rochelle City Hall, days after the murder of George Floyd. An excerpt. I've always been a vivid dreamer, both literally and figuratively. When I lay my head to sleep at night, I often fantasize about where I'll be in the future. I smile as pictures of me with my future family, kids, dogs, white picket fence, the whole nine, circle my brain. Soon the flashes of promise and purpose come to a sudden halt, and I find myself forcing my eyes open in an effort to simply catch my breath. Oftentimes the visions of kids playing in the yard are followed by visions of me sitting with my black son in tears, explaining how it is that he should behave around the police, though sometimes it's me crying over his grave because I didn't get to the conversation early enough in his life. Other times, the visions of kids running down the block toward the ice cream truck turn into the heart-wrenching conversations I'll have with my black daughter. Conversations during which I'm comforting my sobbing child who feels undervalued due to the shade of her skin or the type of curls that run through her hair, though sometimes she's crying alone in her room because I was another black woman whose body didn't make it out of the hospital alive while birthing her. Dear white people, what are you doing to make sure your kids won't be physically, mentally, and emotionally killing mine? This is on us. The fear, the racism that she and every person of color has to live with every moment of every day. A constant erosion of dignity, a limitation of possibility, the presumption that you are not smart or educated or eloquent. This is on us. We participate in and support a culture of racism. This is the Yom Kippur of 2020, the Yom Kippur of the pandemic, the Yom Kippur of Black Lives Matter. I remember when we circled the city with love, when we stood 6 feet apart against racism. I remember the urgency. I remember the marches and the vigils. The suffering of the COVID epidemic peeled us back and left us more vulnerable. Our hearts were cracked open, and for a while we were able to feel more, to feel with others for a while. Do we still feel the urgency? Are we already inured to the pain? Have other crises commanded our attention and shifted this one from view? The crisis of racism is not only about people of color. White people are also profoundly affected by racism. The November election is being fought over this issue. What does it mean to be white? How do we tell the story about who we are, about how America came to be, about the America we imagine? The future of our country depends on how we deal with the crisis of racism. As Ta-Nehisi Coates writes, what I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to spiritual renewal, a revolution of the American consciousness. We can't afford to go back to the way things were before COVID, to not seeing, not feeling. We have to remember that for a brief moment, our hearts were cracked open and we saw the pain. We are in the midst of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Our tradition has clear guidelines. This is how we atone. Face ourselves honestly, understand the hurt we have caused on purpose or inadvertently, and acknowledge it, ask for forgiveness, make amends. All over the United States, people are beginning this work of atonement. 1, facing ourselves. How have I managed to be a full functioning professional and a competent adult and not know what to do about racism? 2, how do we acknowledge the pain we have caused by our indifference? The task is overwhelming, but that can't stop us from taking small steps. Inspired by my colleague, Rabbi Peter Stein, we have created a sign that I hope you will post on your lawn or in your window. Our Torah has given us the words. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Do not stand idle on the blood of your brother. Black lives matter. The signs are here at Kol Ami. It is a small step, but it is a statement that you can count on me in this fight, in this national reckoning and spiritual renewal. When you bring in your high holiday prayer books, the Machzorim, please pick up a sign. And 3, how do we make amends? How do we repair our broken world? Some of the most effective work is happening locally. The City Council of Charlotte, North Carolina voted unanimously this summer to adopt the proposal of the Truth, Reconciliation, and Atonement Commission Reimagine America project. The lead author of that proposal, Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, will be anchoring a Zoom call for us this afternoon. The call will be moderated by Reverend Noel D'Amico, Director of Social Justice at the Workers' Circle, and our own Peter Ginsburg, Vice President of Content Production and Storyteller for the NBA. This call will be a chance for us to listen and to learn and to consider how we might start this work here at home, here in Westchester County. We will also be joined by county and state members of government. Hotel Corona in Jerusalem was such a happy story. It was a small oasis of possibility for a few amazing weeks. What made it work? The Hotel Corona guests speculated. Everyone had access to food and secure lodging. Everyone had medical care, equal medical care. And I would add, they were all vulnerable together. The story of Hotel Corona is one of the happiest stories of the pandemic, but it is also one of the most tragic. It lasted for a few incredible weeks. For a brief moment, it was a glimpse of a world that could be. For a brief moment, our hearts were cracked open, we were vulnerable and afraid, and we could feel more, and we could feel with others. We know it's possible. In 1963, standing at the Lincoln Memorial in front of hundreds of thousands of people, Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us, now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. We have come to this sacred spot, he said, to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. We have come, you and I, to this sacred moment, this Yom Kippur, to remind ourselves of the fierce urgency of now. Kiva moed, the time is now.
Kiva moed, kiva moed, kiva moed, kiva moed, yai lai lai, lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai. Ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 Shana Tova Shana Tova Shana Tova Shana Tova ya la Shana Tova.